Can everyone see my screen? Oh, hang on. Is it showing just one slide now?
Yeah.
Cool. Cool technology.
Fancy.
All right, well, we might as well get started. Yeah, I'm just going to stand back away from this thing a little bit. So the talk today is myBB, chaining XSS to RCE. I'll just be going over, who am I? Currently studying a Bachelor of Cybersecurity at Deakin. I should have put it in here, also the treasurer here at DISC. I'm currently interning at Trustwave. I'm interested in all types of security, but I'm mainly focused on web. And I do light research in my spare time. That basically means I don't really do security research in my spare time, but occasionally something like this, which I guess you could classify as security research, or maybe just having fun. Oops. Oh, I have lost control of mine.
GG.
Yeah, I don't know what happened. What's that? Game over. Yeah, I don't know how I lost control of my keyboard.
What the?
Yeah, no, I'm
strange, bro.
I can't even escape.
Can you click?
Hang on. Stop. Oh, hang on. Yeah, I can click with this touchscreen. All right, we'll just do it like that. All right. Good enough. All right, so the background of this, I did not find these vulnerabilities. This research was conducted by 2 security researchers, and it was responsibly disclosed. So it's kind of important that like these patches have been applied or have been released prior to the vulnerabilities being disclosed. I want the background of this. I want to learn more about weaponizing XSS and learn more a bit about JavaScript, because I know JavaScript, but I don't really know it. And also there was no POC publicly available. DLS was actually making one at the time, which is where I got the inspiration from. But I wanted to sort of, I wanted to learn it myself. Oh yeah, I forgot the screen. All right. Actually, and a disclaimer here too. This was all disclosed in like March or something. And so if you have the idea to go out and want to go and exploit, like actual public facing things, I probably wouldn't do it, considering it's still fresh and you might end up actually hurting people. So it's just something to be aware of, that it's actually like, it's fun to play with exploits that are 3 or 4 years old, but this is still super fresh. So yeah, it's probably not something I would take out into the real world, if anything. All right, so the plan is to explore both vulnerabilities affecting myBB. We can learn how we can weaponize them to maximum effect, and then hopefully see the process of developing an exploit. Yeah, as much as possible. I mean, and this is a web cross-site scripting vulnerability, so it's kind of an interesting one. All right, so what is myBB? I didn't really know much about myBB before doing this. I'm not super well versed on the random little open source bulletin board softwares out there. But I did a little bit of research, and it was bulletin board software written in PHP. It's actually been around for a while, even though it's not super popular. It was formerly known as My Bulletin Board, so it's actually changed names a few times. And the most recent security update was in March, which was addressing this issue. All right, next slide. So what is this all about? Oops, yeah. Okay, so what is this all about? Part 2. So the first exploit, the first vulnerability I'll be talking about is a stored XSS in the nested auto URL. So myBB incorrectly handles the auto URL function in messages and can be used to create malfor image tags and execute JavaScript. So it's basically like when you put a link into a message or something. Often they'll use any web app or whatever will use regex to see if there's a link in the message, and if there is, it will put anchor tags or A tags around it so that it actually is a link in the message received. And there's a vulnerability in the way that myBB actually does that parsing. And the second vulnerability is an SQL injection in the theme properties, and you can use this to achieve RCE through the PHP, obviously running on running myBB. And myBB doesn't sanitize theme properties when queried from the database. So that basically means that you can input malicious theme properties, and then you can set that you can import a malicious theme. Specific properties in that theme will be input into the database without sanitization, and then will be called upon later on without sanitization. So it works as a second order SQL injection where you input something into the database first, and then executing it is actually executes your SQL query, which is pretty interesting. Let's see here. So who uses myBB? I didn't really know who used it, and maybe this was why people took interest in this vulnerability. But as far as I can tell, it's. I mean, if you go on Wappalizer, which is a pretty useful website to sort of see what technologies, just from like a glance, what technologies websites are running. And yeah, and the majority were, at least the majority of the top websites were things like Raid Forums, Crack.to, what else, Hat Forums, and Best Black Hat Forums. So they were literally all of them were hacking-esque or hacking adjacent or whatever, cybercrime adjacent forums, which I found kind of interesting. And I mean, I didn't really know that much beforehand. That's probably part of the reason why DLS actually took interest in it, knowing that. But no, that was really interesting because it was like, you know, like these are like the websites that actually, you know, that actually employ myBB. I mean, it is open source, so it's not, you know, not super interesting. Okay, so let's talk about the first vulnerability. So we got the Stored Xss here. So myBB allows users to embed images, links, videos, all sorts of stuff in using a custom implementation of BB codes called mycode. So if you look down here at the top line, you can see that it kind of looks like HTML tags, but they're enclosed in brackets. Those are called BB codes, or myBB has implemented their own, but they're like bulletin board codes, and they're commonly used for people to be able to put things like links and videos and stuff into messages or into posts, but in a way that's safe, you know, because then you could obviously sanitize the stuff before you actually convert to HTML and can prevent things like cross-site scripting or HTML injection. And so you can kind of see here that the top line, you have URL BB codes. You have an opening BB tag and a closing tag, and then underneath it is what that would actually convert to. So it actually converts to just straight anchor tags in HTML. And then the same thing with the hello world in bold. It just puts it into strong tags in HTML. So it's pretty simple, but the reason that's done is usually because you can have a layer of security preventing someone from just from just straight injecting HTML or JavaScript. Okay, so if a URL, I mentioned this before, if a URL is detected in the message, myBB will try to put A tags around it. And so this acts as a means of automatically generating links from URLs and messages. But this can also be abused by putting two URLs inside of an image mycode, allowing an attacker to control attributes of the resulting HTML image tag. So it's pretty interesting because we know that if we put something inside image tags, it will create it will eventually create image tags in HTML. But we can actually abuse the way that it passes the automatic. We can abuse the way that it automatically generates the links and abuse that functionality to actually control attributes of the image tag that we created previously. It's kind of confusing until you sort of see it. So let's take a look at the following payload. So we've got two image tags on the outside. So we've got two URLs in between two myBB codes, and so we can see. So in the first stage, we'll essentially take this and we've got a URL, question mark, bracket, and then another URL, and then on error equals alert. And so we'll go through what actually happens when this is passed by myBB. So in the first stage in the rendering process, the mycodes are stripped out and replaced with their respective HTML tags. So we can see that down here. Instead of image mycodes, it's actually image tags in HTML. And then myBB will then see the second URL and will then try to place A tags around it to create a link. And so we can see what happens down here. So we end up malforming the shit out of the original image tag because we haven't actually finished, because we're currently injecting data into the SRC attribute of the image tag of image tag in HTML. And because we haven't actually closed the double quotes, when the A tag gets injected in, we end up getting the A tag, href equals, and then that first quotation, which would normally encase the link, actually closes our source tag. So you can see that we've managed to actually inject into the attributes of this image tag. And then if we go back to the payload here, we can see http://x.com/onerror equals alert1. And so what's interesting here is if we go back, we can see what actually happens is the HTTP and the x.com end up just being passed as attributes. And because they don't have any values, or at least the browser doesn't consider them to have any browsers, or myBB, sorry, doesn't consider them to have any values, it will leave them blank. And the on error will end up becoming its own attribute. So a funky thing with HTML, and you end up learning it when you're doing XSS payloads, is that you can actually, normally when you're defining attributes in HTML, it's attribute equals something, space, attribute. And instead of that space, you can actually replace it with slashes. So that's where here, http://x.com/on error, those slashes in between HTTP and x.com and the slash between x.com and on error actually tells HTML to pass those things as attributes. So what we get here is we get to actually control the on error, the value inside on error. And what that is what that will give us is JavaScript execution. So in this example, it's just an alert one. So that will just pop a really basic JavaScript alert. But I actually found this really fascinating because it was, because you're just completely malforming the shit out of the original image tag, but it works in your favor because it's an on error, you want it to break anyway, because then it will execute whatever you have inside your on error. And so, controlling this attribute means we can control JavaScript. We can keep JavaScript, sorry. Okay. And so, successfully finally executed JavaScript. So that was a message that I sent to myself. It's showing that I sent it to admin, but at the moment that doesn't matter. This is just showing that we have stored XSS inside the message function by using that technique, by abusing the way that the URLs are passed. So what I normally just do with this? Well, JavaScript runs client side, so we might want to immediately get RCE just from popping XSS. That's pretty obvious. But there are two often further optimizations. These are really useful when thinking about CTFs. There's one which is cookie stealing. I'm sure there's other methods here, but these are the two that I've personally dealt with. Cookie stealing, if you can get an admin or a privileged user to visit an XSS-affected page, we can potentially get the stealer cookie information by actually making a request to a third party or something with the actual, the cookie in the URL or something like that. There's a few. You'll be given a web app, and you'll also be given a way to submit links to the admin. Usually when you see that, you'll actually know, this is usually for cookie stealing or some other type of XSS attack where you're going to be trying to get information out. And then the second thing we could do possibly with XSS is a cross-site request forgery. And now this is if we can get them to visit the site, we may be able to execute some actions done by the app, i.e. logging out, changing password, uploading a theme. In the case of myBB, cross-site request forgery sometimes actually requires chaining another exploit, but sometimes not. It really depends. And sometimes there can be protections put in place, like tokens and stuff, that can make it almost impossible. Okay, so let's talk about the second vulnerability. So we've got XSS. We can send an admin, or we can send anyone a payload and get them to execute JavaScript. So what could we possibly do with that? So the second vulnerability that was found in this disclosure was an SQL injection, an SQL injection that could lead to RCE. So the background of this, myBB admins have access to a theme manager. Themes are basically just XML files with some properties. And they're really simple. And when a theme is uploaded to the XML is passed, and the properties are saved in the database. And this is where the actual vulnerability lies, because it's not sanitizing anything before it's putting in the database, or sanitizing it when it's querying it out of the database, or at least one specific property. Okay, so this is just a basic example theme. There's not much to see here. It's just showing you what a theme might look like. It's just a basic XML file. It's just got a few properties for different things that the theme would actually call on. They're super basic. Okay, so myBB displays components using eval statements, but it escapes quotations when storing values in the database. So this means that myBB actually will take values from the past XML and will store them in the database, and then later on we'll actually use eval to display, or to actually render that information. Eval, as some of you may know, is a really dangerous PHP function, because basically it will just evaluate any string as PHP. So if you can find a way to inject into an eval or escape the original statement, there's a lot of ways of actually achieving RCE. So typically RCE inside an eval usually requires either double quotes or it requires a question mark. And that's because those are, the double quotes is usually to escape the actual string that you're inside. And the question mark is a way of executing PHP. The question mark is a way of executing PHP code it's a quick way of basically executing PHP code. I don't really know how else to explain it. It's a quick way of executing like of shell commands. But the issue here was that they escaped the double quote when storing values in the database, and also escaped the question mark. So basically, we're sitting here and we know, okay, well, we know we're avowing this stuff coming straight out of that. We can control the stuff that is being avowed by controlling what we upload with via XML. But the issue is that the two things we need to get RCE are escaped already. So we're kind of a sitting duck at this point. And this is where this is where the SQL injection comes in. I don't know why this isn't. Oh. All right. So it was found that the template set property was susceptible to a second order SQL injection. So when a theme is uploaded, the template set property is copied into the database and later used in queries without sanitization. So that was what I was saying before. And this is a means. So this is a means that we can use a payload, including a question mark. A $sign. So I've been saying question mark, and achieve RCE. And that's because we can actually use SQL injection to inject the values that we want into the database, into a specific theme, and then call those back. And in doing so, we can bypass the protections that were put in place. So myBB fetches all possible template values at the beginning of each page load, and this query fetches the template set property. And then this is embedded unsanitized into the query string below. So we can see here, simple flex, templates, title in, and then in theme, template set, array, order by. So you can see we're right in the middle of the SQL query there. And so the researchers that found this vulnerability found a payload that they were able to use to execute PHP or execute shell commands through PHP. And that's the command we see here below. So this is an example. This is a simple payload here. This is an example payload. And this is a theme that we could upload. We don't actually need any more properties than that. All we really need is the main theme property, like the main actual theme, and the template set property, and it will upload and it will be valid. It won't actually show anything on the. It kind of breaks the site, but it doesn't. It's confusing. It's hard to explain. So here we can see the bottom is what the resulting query would look like. And so you can see here we've actually injected. And you can see here we've actually been able to inject SQL into the database, and in doing so, actually inject PHP. So it's weird because we're using SQL injection to be able to bypass the filters that are removing our $sign and our double quotes, and we're using that second order SQL injection to bypass that filter. So it's super weird. That's part of the reason why I was really interested in this, because it was kind of a random, sort of a backwards way of doing it, but it made a lot of sense. And so we can see here this pass-through function will just execute whatever you give it as a shell command. And it won't necessarily, I'm not 100% sure, I think pass-through doesn't give you the output. I think that's fine. There's a couple of those systems as well. There's a couple, and they're all pretty similar in terms of running shell commands, but they just depend on whether they give you output or not. So pass-through is able to be used with the $sign there, and then inside two squiggly brackets. And so that's like valid PHP for anything inside a $sign and two squiggly lines will be executed. And we've got a simple payload here, which is we're just running LS at the moment.
think we lost him. It was going all right. It was kind of kicking through, but
Damn, I thought this was me for a second.
Money on that he's still talking to himself there.
yeah, probably.
Yeah. Damn, this fucking this like SQL injection's actually hectic.
Yeah. It's quite interesting, but it's trying to come across things like this is I don't know where to start.
Oh, to be honest, you could find that with grep. I was like,
Yeah.
damn, why didn't I find that?
I suppose there's so many places to look. Yep.
Yeah, it is. I'm
Yeah, I
tipping
suppose.
this was found years ago, and it's only like just sort of started becoming a problem, I should say. I reckon stuff like this has been actively exploited for ages, but you never know. It's like it's just so simple. Sure.
And so what that will actually do is it will just download like a.
Oh my god.
Oh shit, really?
Yeah.
Okay, what slide was on? Okay, I'm here now. What slide was on?
You're on the
If you open it up again, we can.
the second SQL injection
Oh, is it not open? Oh.
with like
I don't.
it was like
Dude, this
the
computer is
example
fucked.
query.
I can't actually get at it. I can use the touchscreen. Oh. Yes, all right, I'm out. All right, we're good. One sec. Let me just, okay, yeah, it's just not sharing my screen. Sorry, guys, that's retarded. Window. No, I know, but I don't know why it would have disconnected. That's all. But I didn't hear any noise or anything. It just like, yeah, you guys just disappeared, I think. So can you see the PowerPoint?
Yeah, we were on the previous slide. Yeah, this one.
Cool. Oh. All right.
Well, that's pretty far back.
Yeah.
Pardon?
Where fetches multiple template values. Right here?
Yeah.
So here I'm just showing. So here's is how we embedded our understand is how we ended up in the query string, and you can see it. Okay, so sorry, we went through that. Yeah. Okay, so so this is a simple theme. We don't actually need much for the theme. All you really need is a single property. It seems like the simpler the actual better the themes work, because if you kind of overcomplicated them, they'd end up breaking the eval statement. That end up breaking myBB. in turn would end up preventing the execution of the final payload. It's actually super annoying. And so the bottom, and so the bottom here is basically how that query that I've uploaded via the Theme Manager and XML is actually input into the database. And we can see that it's basically just injected straight in. And so the researchers who found this vulnerability were the ones who actually found this payload. Because I probably would have taken me a really long time to actually figure out the payload. I'm not that much of an SQL wizard yet. Never. Okay, so we know how to exploit, but how to chain. So the basic way that this will happen is we'll create a payload, and we'll send a message with the XSS payload to the admin. The admin will open the message, triggering the XSS. The full payload will be downloaded and executed, and that's a simple JavaScript file that's hosted. And then this will upload a theme, set it as default, then trigger the RCE. Can you guys still hear me?
Yeah.
Okay, cool. Sorry, no, I'm going to be conscious of that. All right. Okay, cool. So we kind of have an idea of how it's going to work. Send a message to the admin. Admin opens message. That will download a bit of JavaScript. That JavaScript will then execute, uploading a theme, setting theme as default, and then finally visiting index, which then will then execute our payload, giving us RCE. And that's actually really important. A really important thing was that it has to be set to default, and then you have to visit index, because otherwise myBB doesn't actually look at that theme and go, oh, this one's default, and doesn't actually query that specific theme from the database. So making it default was important, which did require a couple more post requests, but it was interesting. So the XSS payload that we created has to be encoded, as we can't use double quotes. And so as we need to perform a number of actions on the admin's behalf, I opted to use jQuery get script to pull down an executed JavaScript file rather than having one massive encoded payload. You could possibly have one giant encoded payload, but it's probably not smart. I mean, I don't know. It's just, and it's also when you're testing, you really only need to set up one XSS payload to keep calling down a script, and then you can just edit that script all you want to keep, and then keep testing the payload. So that actually made it a lot simpler as well. So here is the starter payload. So here we start with a call to 127.0.0.1. So we're just calling localhost for exploit.js. And then this was actually, and because we need those two double quotes inside the get script, this whole string, question mark get script, and then the whole function call was encoded using character encoding. And so that allows us to get around the double quotes. And it's also something useful to sort of be aware of when it comes to CTFs and stuff, because you'll often find that you can get around some XSS filters like this, like the double quote, for example, using character encoding. It's a really, really popular bypass. Very common. Okay, so finally, we wrap that encoded portion in a string from chair code, and then we wrap that in an eval. So the string from chair code will actually just take our encoded payload, and we'll just convert it from the encoded version form into a string. And then eval works just like eval does in PHP. This is JavaScript. It will just take a string and just execute it as JavaScript. So what this will do is we'll decode our payload to a string, and then it will try to execute that string as JavaScript. This will then pull down our exploit and then run all the code inside our .js file. And that also means that you could actually have an infinitely complicated SSIF payload in this way, because then you could just have an infinitely long JavaScript file. Okay. So for the RCE portion of the payload, so that's basically what we put inside the template set property of the theme. I opted just to write a simple PHP web shell to the root, to web root of the forum. So it was just basically echo a PHP simple web shell into shell.php, and that was because when I ended up with command execution, it was running actually running in the web root directory, and so just creating a file just like this means that it will always create the shell.php just in the web root. And so as a non-authenticated user or whatever, who might not have access to say /uploads or some other directory, it means that I can actually just get a shell in it that's accessible by anyone. And I mean, that's I don't know. Yeah, from an engagement standpoint, pen testing, that's stupid. But from this perspective, it was just a great way of showing an example. How to get a shell essentially. So here is the final payload, and there's a couple slides here, but I'll go through a couple of these different functions. The first one here is create an XML theme. So basically, all this does is it just uses XML DOM, which is just some JavaScript crap. This was annoying, to be honest. It just uses JavaScript to create the same. It just uses JavaScript to essentially create the same theme here, but then inside the pass-through function, we've just changed it and we've just added that shell command to write to a web shell. Okay, we'll get back here. Whoops. So that's really simple. So we're just creating an element properties, creating an element template set, and then we're putting in a query inside of that thing, and then we're just converting it to XML. It's serializing it, I guess, to XML. It's nothing super fancy. And then the last thing there, result XML version /1. That was just something that's required because myBB wants that at the top of all of its themes, and sometimes if it's not correct, I've ran into a couple of issues that it would complain because it would actually look for the version or whatever. And so that was the one thing that was really important. Okay. We've used this function, we've built our form, and that will return the actual file. That will actually return the XML file. And so the next function is to upload. So here we're basically just appending form data, and you can actually see that there's a CSRF token. And I didn't show the function here because it's pretty simple, but it's basically it just queries the theme manager and then just finds a specific URL that actually has the CSRF token in it. So then we can just continuously pass it and keep executing these post requests. And so this is just appending. This is just recreating the form data that we actually initially saw when uploading an XML theme. I should have taken a screenshot of what the request looked like when uploading an XML theme, but it was pretty basic. It just had a number of different fields for form data and a bunch of stuff inside of it. But we can see here the important one is the second form data.append local file, create XML theme, which is what us running that function and then it returning the file straight into here, and then selecting the name. And it's important to understand, or at least to remember, at least it was for me, when I was doing this, every time I uploaded a theme, it wouldn't upload it again if the same name was there, so I had to continuously delete it. So for a while, I kept uploading it's a theme.xml, thinking it was actually working, but it wasn't. It was actually failing, and because it's all blind, I wasn't able to see anything. And so I thought that I wasn't able to get it work, but I realized, it was as simple as just the fact that it will actually error out if you try to upload a theme with the same name. So that was something to keep in mind. And so, I guess if this was a malicious attack, then that would be like, that might be something that would actually probably break the site, because that's what I found the most annoying is if you actually, if you try to upload a theme that was named the same theme, it fails, but then it will still go through the code to actually set that as default, and it just ended up breaking a bunch of stuff. It was frustrating, but that's okay. Part of the learning experience. So cool, yeah. So we end up with form data, and then we send the post request to index.php module, and basically just a theme manager. It's just a simple form, which is just where you can upload themes. Okay. Okay, so now we've uploaded the theme, and as long as the theme name was unique, then we can assume yes, good, it's uploaded. And so now we have to set the theme to default. And this is pretty simple, and all it basically required is it's just clicking basically. So basically all that was clicking and sending a request. But so basically we just go through and we just have to find. The first bit here, the request. So request.open. So we're opening this URL here. So this is just like the home of the theme manager, and it's where it shows you what themes are what and where you can set them as default. And then I basically use that to find the text content where it's a theme, and then use that to actually find, to find here the query down here. which is find the actual URL, which is used in the post request to make the theme as default. So it's kind of confusing, and it actually just took me a while of just sort of like working through the HTML and finding the actual things that I wanted. But basically, I just sort of find it's a theme, and then find a couple of and then find the actual URL that's required, and then make a a GET request to that URL that sets the theme as a default. And you can see here that we actually need a TID and my post key, which is the CSRF token. And so now once we've done that, so we can see set upload of theme to default. So we set it to default, request to send, and then down here request onload. So that's once we get a response, we'll basically just go. Okay, cool, go and call /index.php or just /, and that will be the final part of the payload, which will actually execute it. So this is probably the most important function because it actually sets the theme to default and then actually triggers it, which is both of these are required to actually get your code to run. Okay, now this is I can show you the final. This might take a second to load because it is on YouTube. Let's just give it a minute. PowerPoint was annoying about whatever the video format was. All right, so we can see I'm just setting a HTTP server here on port 80. And all that just is doing is just hosting my JS file. So you can see here there's no file at shell.php. And I've put 2 of the payloads in here. That's only because sometimes it doesn't work first try unless you put 2 in there. And you can see that we're sending this from just a normal user. And so that's important. And we're sending it to the admin. So we send our message, malicious message, and then we'll go to a new private window. And if you look up at the top, I'll show it in a minute. We're our admin. And you can see here, it kind of renders the 2 images, but it obviously can't because there's nothing there. And if we reload the page, it reloads as blank. And that's a good thing because it means it's actually using our theme. It's just we don't have any of the properties set that's normally there. And so now shell.php is shown. It's not shown, but it's obviously found because it's not giving you straight 404. And we can put a command in, run a command. And this was just an easy way of sort of showing cool command execution, or maybe more from the perspective of how an attacker might choose to do it, where they might just like dump a web shell on and then just allow, oops, can I go to the next slide? No, not. There we go, nice. And then the last slide is my references. So the top one is actually the most important one, is that they were actually the 2 guys who wrote that blog post were the 2 people who found the 2 vulnerabilities in myBB. And then the blog post underneath it was basically just the one that pointed me to that first one. But yeah, it was pretty interesting. I've done this talk before. I did this talk once before, like last week, and I kind of got to the end and realized it's a little confusing for someone who probably hasn't spent a bunch of time on it. But I guess that was part of the reason why I was interested in it, because it kind of gave me a little bit more of that sort of knowledge about JavaScript and cross-site request forgery and XSS and stuff. So yeah,
that's sick, man. That was sick.
Yeah, you guys are still there. Yeah, it's hard to explain. I mean, it's hard to continue. I mean, you could kind of keep breaking it down, and then it's like the more I try to break things down, actually, the harder I get to explain.
Yeah.
Yeah.
No, I just think it's like a really interesting sort of attack vector, because like when you think about
that's what I didn't explain was that it's really XSS will never get you anywhere.
Yeah.
Like, I mean, maybe you can change your password or log someone out, but most modern web apps have pretty good cross-site request forgery sort of protections in place. But, it's very rare to be able to get like to RCE. Send admin a message and then just give a shell in your web root. It's like, I don't know, it's nice.
Yeah, it is nice.
Yeah.
I don't know. I just like wonder what other sort of stuff you could hit with it, like as an admin, if you get what I mean.
Oh, I'm sure there's other stuff. Yeah, 100%. Yeah. So I can get my mouse back. I think this thing goes in tablet mode when it's.
Oh, you know what? That's probably what it was.
It is. Yeah, it is. It's tablet. Let's see if it. Screen sharing still, or is it stopped? Cool. All right, cool. Yeah, no, I don't know. It was an interesting thing. I mean, DLS was the one who put me onto it, so like that was the main thing. And like all of my projects, it was like an idea that DLS had months prior.
That's true.
But it was just like, yeah. But it was interesting because he just sort of he just dumped the web root to he just like dumped the DB. DLS style, you know, and I was like, I'm not web shell. Like, I just like shells. Yeah. Like, I'm less of a DB guy, I'm more like a shell guy.
With with DBs, a lot of people like will disable the system and like pass through functions and whatnot.
Yeah, no shit.
So like, I think that's why I went straight for the DB.
Oh, totally.
You can't really disable that.
And you can also pull admin's password out, and then you just have all the functionality that I just described without actually having to make a fucking payload.
Exactly.
So that's also like the thing, yeah. 100%. Yeah.
I don't know. It was really cool.
Yeah, hopefully.
I might make like a cheeky, like, I don't know, challenge or something that's like second order stuff.
Yeah, sure. Yeah, definitely. Yeah, just have to figure out a way to, hint towards it, or some way of like, yeah.
Like second order is just hectic.
Yeah, I've never done second order before. I was like, oh, okay, this is interesting. I mean, obviously, I'm just kind of copying a payload from the internet. You know, that's important to remember. But still, it's fucking interesting. Yeah, very interesting. Yeah, but I mean, I was working on this. That POC came out because I remember Taryn put it up on the chat. I was like, oh fuck, someone made it POC. I just like left it. Mine ended up being pretty similar, but I just left it because I was like, I don't want to look at it. I want to figure this out.
That's sick.
Yeah.
I don't know. I really like that second order query. It was very
nice
because like he made the first query error out, so it wouldn't actually return any data.
Exactly.
DB, and
then you want the on error. You want that, like, yeah. Yeah.
And I think that's a really cool way of sort of bypassing that filter.
Yeah, well, I tried to do something similar with Security Colony or whatever, and that dude came out on the chat and was like, "Yeah, I saw you were trying to screw over that." I was like, "Yeah, I wanted to see," because normally if you use BB codes, they're pretty secure.
Yeah.
But then they just have their own specific. They're like, "Oh, we took BB codes, but we made them my codes," you know, and it's like, and that's where that's actually where like the vulnerability lay, because it's just like, yeah.
I remember back in my forum days, I actually found like a myBB error thing on like on I think it was hack forums. So like at the time I didn't really want to use one main account, so I had a like bunch of low rep accounts, but pretty much you could like post a link, but you had to have 50 reps to post a link. So it would always error out. So you do that, and then you like pretty much put the link inside of the link or something, and it just turns it straight into a link. So yeah, it was really ridiculous, but I don't know. I told him about it after a while, and I was just like, lol. But
it's just interesting because I think it's just it's. We were talking about attributes or whatever from that CTF last week, and I was like, that's actually. I was like, I'm definitely familiar with attribute injection, but myBB one is pretty cracked out.
Yeah.
Like, they would have definitely just had to done a bunch of debugging with PHP and then just echo it out all of those queries to actually see what was happening. It was just, it's just kind of cooked.
Yeah. So I'm testing a PHP web app at the moment.
Yeah. Oh yeah, no shit.
It is wonderful, man. I almost got RCE on it, but like I need to sort of go look up the actual library and see if I can do something there. But
hell yeah.
Yeah. It's gonna be sick. All right.